Hi, everybody. I'm David Butler.
I'm Emily Freeman.
Welcome to Don't Miss This. This is weird, but I've just gotten used to only talking to a camera. But for some reason, like right now, I was like, this is so bizarre. We're just in this empty room, but filled. It feels like it's filled with all of you. This is so rad.
We wish you were all here.
I know.
One day we are going to all get together.
Yeah.
This year.
Yes, in the summer.
In the summer.
Is what we're hoping
I hope
for.
So.
That would be really rad.
Yeah.
Okay, if it's Easter time right now, and if you want the whole explanation of what we're doing for Easter, we just have two big ideas. They're not really big. They're simple, but like fun. Two ideas
so
for
fun
Easter.
When they were so big, though.
Yeah. Well, let's call them big. There's two ideas for Easter. One of them is for Easter Day, and then one of them is to celebrate Easter like the whole week leading up to us. We have two ideas, and we've gathered a bunch of resources for you. This is for the day of.
Yeah, let's show them both things. Because you know we love Easter. And we want to count it down like we do for Christmas. Because sometimes you just wake up and all of a sudden it's Easter and you didn't even know. So the first one is.
Oh yeah, so this is a countdown thing. The week of Easter, Sunday to Sunday. We've divided up the living Christ with the names of Christ. If you want to kind of participate with us doing this. And this is what they look like. It's a free download. It's in the newsletter and on the app.
And you can do it. We're just going to study names of Christ every night, the whole living Christ, kind of like what we did at Christmas. But this time, instead of in 25 days, just in the week starting Palm Sunday all the way till Easter, and just immersing ourselves in the living Christ and in those names and who he is. We're going to be using the Emmanuel wreath. So all of that described
And we
there.
forgot to say this last week. If you need new candles for the Emmanuel wreath, Target is where we found some replacements.
Walmart has some.
Amazon also has some too. So be thinking about that if you want to use that one. And they're in stock. We just found out.
Yeah, all the wreaths finally are
if
off
you want
the
to do
boat.
that with us. But you could just download this if you wanted and just kind of do it around the kitchen table each night.
We tried to come up with something you could just do with what you have at home. So there's one. Then we're so excited about this one. Let me see if you can see it. So all these things we just found at my house. We really want to talk about the prophecies in the Old Testament that are talking about Easter that is coming. And so you can easily just put together this box. We tell you in the last video everything you need for the box. It's also in the newsletter. And this is something we're going to be doing on Easter morning at our houses and in the Easter video.
It's the Genesis 42 to 50 video if you want more details on that. But maybe that was enough. If you need more, go back to the newsletter or Genesis 42 to 50, the beginning. So, okay, you guys, this next piece is so awesome because...
So we're in Egypt. Remember, we came after
Joseph
and his family came.
Remember, Joseph moved first, then his family came, then the whole family moved into Egypt. So that's why we have this big pyramid on here to represent now the house of Israel is in Egypt. And this is our pick. It's a picture that's also on a tip-in that we'll show you a little bit later that Eva drew of just the beginning part of the story.
We picked this picture on purpose and had Eva do it because of the women. That's where we're going to start.
Yeah.
These women. We love to highlight wherever we can the women in the Old Testament. So this is going to be one of those stories.
Yeah, I try to highlight the men in the Old Testament, but you can do this. Just kidding.
That is why we teach together.
So that's a story that we're going to start with. And it's interesting when you're reading the Bible because the book of Genesis ends with that kind of the family blessings. And there they are. And Genesis almost kind of ends with a happily ever after. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
You could almost write that at the end of Genesis. Then you turn the page and all of a sudden they are slaves.
Yes.
And several hundred years have passed.
Also, who loves that this is what our pages look like right now for this lesson? Because we have so many things we want to tell you about right now. It's going to be so fun.
So you just open up the story and you'll find out later, kind of backtrack information that there's a new group that's taken over Egypt that doesn't know the house of Joseph and doesn't know the house of Israel.
And they don't know what Joseph did. They just don't have any idea.
And years have passed and they see this group, this foreign group, these Hebrew people who are living in Egypt, and they are a substantial size
they're
people.
Thriving. I love what it says in Exodus 1, right at the very get-go. They start worrying that they're going to be, I think it says, more and mightier than we are. And I just love, that's in Exodus 1, verse 9. The children of Israel are more and mightier than we are. And he starts to get really nervous about that.
So his first idea, this new leader,
Pharaoh.
This Pharaoh that's there, decides, I'm going to put them to work. And if they're so busy working and so tired, then they can't expand. They can't have more kids. They can't get bigger. That idea doesn't work. They keep getting bigger and multiplying more and more and more. When they moved into Egypt, they are like 70 people big. When they leave Egypt, most Bible scholars think they're around several million people.
I can't wait to see how big you were going to say it was going to be, because also some Bible scholars think they were like 3,000. So you just have no
huge
idea.
range, right? But start at 70. They get so big after that.
For some reason, they become threatening. Whatever that number is feels really threatening.
So the next idea, which jumps us really into the part we want to like lean into, is that Pharaoh has this idea that I will kill all the male babies that are born. That way they can't raise up an army. Too bad they didn't know girls could fight Mulan, you know. But that was his. That was the second idea, is I'm going to have all these babies. So he tells all of the Hebrew midwives, if a baby is born and it is a boy, I want you to kill it right away. And that's kind of where we jump in. We've got these 4 women who kind of are the beginning of the deliverance story, and what each of them do mirrors the like bigger deliverance story that you're going to see happening with the Red Sea and the wilderness and everything that's coming.
You love that a lot of Bible scholars say that Exodus chapter 1 is in small, just a small example of the entire rest of the book of Exodus, that we will see 4 really important principles here in Exodus 1 that will then play out in Moses' story. So it's really fun to watch what we see here. It's going to start with these midwives. If you just turn, well, first of all, let's talk about this. Because so the Hebrew midwives now are going to be in charge of making sure that no baby boy lives, which, can you imagine living in a time like that? And how dark that would be? Like, think about, you can't really hide the delivery of a baby. It's noisy. Also, you can't really hide the pregnancy.
Yeah, right.
You know, like there's no way to hide that you're about to have a baby. No one knows if it's going to be a boy or girl. Now everybody knows when that baby is born, there's a chance you won't get to keep it. I can't even imagine the anxiety of that and just the darkness. And who loves that these 2 women's names, Shifra and Pua, we find them in verse 15 of Exodus 1. Shifra means brilliant, and Pua means to glitter. I love that there was light in the midst of this dark moment in these 2 women. And it tells us in verse 17 that they feared God. Remember, that word feared can also be translated as reverenced or stood in awe of God, that God came first and they knew what God would want. And so they kept the baby boys alive. And the king of Egypt called, and he was so mad, and he was like, why are you doing this thing and not doing what I told you with these baby boys? And they said, oh, it's because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, because they're lively and they deliver before we can even get to them. So then we don't know if it's a boy or if it's a girl. And I love in verse 20 when it says, therefore God dealt well with the midwives. That there just was this relationship between God and these women who were coming to preserve life in that moment. And the reason why they did is because they revered God. They knew who he was. So that is the first message of deliverance that we learn in this chapter.
And I like the way you just said that, because it's going to be true of all of these women, all 4 that we go through, that they partner with God in this deliverance. Mm-hmm. And it's like anybody called as a deliverer, it would be just neat to remember, you know, for like, I love thinking that about, you know, even delivering a baby, you know, that you're just like, oh, you become a co-creator with God. And in this story, each of these women become these co-deliverers, you know,
so
with
good.
God.
And I forgot, this goes into 2 too. So it's not just chapter 1 that becomes the theme, but it's chapters 1 and 2 that become this theme of the story we're about to enter into.
Okay, so next to the midwives in the journal, you might want to write something about their story if you want, but for sure write the phrase, they revered God. Like that is something that we learn about those midwives. The next person is Jochebed. This is Moses' mom's name.
Everyone
And
else says Jochebed.
That's not right. It's not good. You have to have a thing. Have you ever seen
In case
Prince
you
of
didn't know
Egypt?
what name he was saying, I'm just translating.
Oh yeah, in
for
Prince
you.
of Egypt, it says the girl says, "You were born of my mother Jochebed." That's where I learned it. It's Prince of Egypt. You should watch Prince of Egypt for the next lesson. It's funner. So Exodus 2. You find her, you meet her, and she just gets introduced to the beginning and find out that she has this baby, and it was a goodly child, which she was just so drawn to. It's like there's something about this baby that there's a destiny about him, and of course, like any mother, she just is so endeared to him right away, and she hid him for 3 months. She kept him alive for 3 months and hid him from the soldiers, because there was now this new commission at the end of chapter 1. Okay, anytime you see a baby, just throw it in the river. If the midwives can't do it, we'll just toss them all in the river. And it says in verse 3, when she could no longer hide him, she made for him an ark of bulrushes, and she daubed it with slime and with pitch, and she put the child therein, and she laid him into the river. And one thing that's interesting about that idea of her creating this ark is that word only shows up twice in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. And one is with Noah's ark, and the second one is right here. And even the description of it, that it was daubed with pitch and slime around it to make it, just parallels these two stories. And you have this one story of Noah, where he was a co-deliverer with God for all of humanity. And then now here's this other story of Jochebed, Moses' mother, and a co-deliverer with God who delivers the house of Israel, or the means for the house of Israel right here. And so it's just neat that you have these two parallel ark stories that are happening right next to each other.
And Noah has one, and Moses will come out of one, which is just so interesting.
Yeah, and she lays him into the river. We put for her the word sacrifice, because certainly it's not written in the text, but it would be absurd to not think that this wasn't an inspired move. You know, she hid him for 3 months, and God certainly was pressing into that story and upon her, and gave her this idea, maybe gave her an assurance. We don't know what happened behind there, but the fact of the matter is you had a mom who put her baby into the river, and at 3 months old.
Yeah, what's going to happen to him? He can't feed himself. He can't swim.
Right.
He can't. I mean, he is at the mercy. You think about like the brother of Jared, and they commended themselves unto the Lord. That is totally what is happening there. She just sends him off.
And it's one thing to commend yourself to the Lord. It's another thing to commend a helpless baby to the Lord. To just say, I mean, that act of submission, I think it's like almost unparalleled anywhere else, you know, in the Old Testament, where you're just like, of somebody just saying, there's no other chance for this baby to live except you, right? Except God.
Yeah.
Like that's the only chance. So that's the second one.
And so then they go, and she lays it in the flags by the river's bank. And then now is going to come. So we've met the two midwives and the mom. Now we're going to meet the sister. Some people think the sister is Miriam. No one's sure if she was older or younger than Moses. On your paper, we wrote Miriam because we just like to think it might have been her.
Oh, we forgot to say what Jochebed's name means, because that's so good.
Yes, say that.
If you want to write this here, her name means Jehovah is glory. And isn't that just a perfect description of what she actually believes? Yeah. Okay, sorry.
So
back
then
to the sister.
The sister stands far off because she wants to see what is going to happen to the baby. And then we get the next woman who's going to come, which is Pharaoh's daughter. And she comes down to wash herself at the river. And her maidens are walking by the riverside. And they see the ark among the flags. And she tells one of her maidens, go get that. What is that? Bring it over here. And when she opened it, she sees the baby.
I'm so afraid of crocodiles
that
in my life
that
I can't even, when she tells that maid to go get the thing out of the bulrushes, I'm like, she's gonna die. Every time I'm like,
she's safe.
I think the next
we need
verse
to count
is
the maid too. We didn't even count the maid in the story. So then you have the maid, and then she goes and she sees the baby, and the baby's crying because by now he's so hungry. Who even knows how long he's been there? And she said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. So she knows right off the bat what she sees. And then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, should I go call a nurse of the Hebrew woman that she could come and nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. And the maid went, and she called the child's mother, which, can you imagine? That mom has never been so happy in her life.
Awesome.
And she gets to go and be part of that growing up of that boy. And he becomes the son of the Pharaoh's daughter, and she calls his name Moses, which is so interesting. In Egyptian, Moses would mean a son. In Greek, it means rescued. And in Hebrew, it means to draw out, which is so interesting because she drew him out. But he will draw out all of Israel. So you just love the thought of these names as we're going through and what they mean to this story. I love this, that as you look at the women in chapters 1 and 2, these were all women who worked to bring about God's purpose, every one of them. That whether they knew they were or not, every one of those women was working together to bring about God's purpose. And I love the idea of that. I love the idea of them just answering the call of the moment. I was with a friend this week talking, and we were just talking about, like, what about the moments when you feel unfulfilled, or you wonder if you have a mission, or if there's something you could be doing in your life, and how you discover what that is. And we were talking about how so often we wait for a literal call to come. Like the bishop is going to call you to be a primary teacher, or he's going to call you to serve in the young women's. And what I love about these women is they were listening for a call just within their own roofs. That they just were like, what could I do to help forward the work of the Lord right now in my arena?
Right. Because like the midwives couldn't draw Moses out of the river, and like the Pharaoh's daughter couldn't, be the one to sacrifice the baby. Like they all played their part in their station.
Yeah, and within their own little circle of influence. And it just makes me think to myself, each of us can help bring about God's purpose in the part where we live, in the circle of influence we have, whatever it is. And are we every morning just listening for that call? Are we ready to answer and to be part of the great work that is happening? That as I was talking with this friend, I was like, I don't ever feel unfulfilled or dissatisfied with my role in God's plan, because he keeps me really busy. He just keeps me busy. He always has a work for me to do. And I think if you are at a point where you're feeling unfulfilled or wondering where your work is, just ask, just pray. He'll open your eyes to the boy down the street, or to the neighbor next door, or to somewhere where you could give a message of hope. Or I love bring glitter or light into a dark place. The world is so dark right now. Shouldn't we glitter?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we bring light into this place right now? And I think about when President Kimball said, at the end times, in those last days, we would be recognized because of our happiness, because of our joy in the gospel, because we were distinct and different in happy and good ways, and because we could articulate that. And I just think that let's be those women. Yeah,
and living the gospel is really these four things. It's to love God and to sacrifice and to watch over and bring people out of hard situations. And I just love looking at each of these people and just thinking, one, I don't think they knew the place they had to, the part they played in the bigger picture. And I think that's
and they may never have known.
Right. And I think that'll happen with us, that we just like, I want to do some great thing. But it's just like they were involved in a really great thing. And God couldn't have brought out he could have, but he brought out the deliverance through each of them collectively, not just one of them.
That's
it's like
so
they
good.
all were essential to the deliverance story. Like we're just like, Moses is going to put the staff in the water and it's going to open up and he gets all the statues and he gets to be the hero, and he's great. We're going to talk about that. But as the fact is, like, that there was a precursor to putting that staff into the water, and all these people played a part in it. And I just think we just have to trust that God's going to take whatever my sacrifice, my watching over, my glittering is, and He's going to like weave it into the great story of deliverance that He's doing right now.
That's so good. And before we move on, let's just make sure we marry those things up. So the midwives revere God. That's what we learn. Jochebed sacrificed. Then Miriam, or the sister, whoever it was, watched over. And then Pharaoh's daughter drew out. Those are the 4 things now we want to watch for as we go into Moses' story right now. There's a tip-in for this week if you are doing the tip-ins. It just says, and she called his name Moses because she drew him out of the water. But I love that what you get to see here are these women who were all a part of the beginning of this story of deliverance. And just sometimes we dive into Exodus and we forget the women. So we thought if we gave you a little tip-in right here, then you would be like, oh yeah, why did we put women right here? And then maybe it would remind you, oh, we just love in chapters 1 and 2 the story of the women.
And let's put this, maybe something that you want to mark here that just is said about Pharaoh's daughter, but it's true of all of them, is just that, where is that line where she drew him out? She saw him.
20?
Oh yeah, no, back up a little. 6, Exodus 2:6. I just like that the moment she sees the baby, she had compassion on him. And I really like the idea of that compassion was the precursor to all of these things. Like,
that's so good.
That it's kind of the initial, like, I don't know, the spark.
Yeah.
That starts all of them. It's like, oh, which is a gift from God to have compassion. It's cool.
And then the story is going to begin. The big deliverance story is going to begin at the very end of Exodus 2. I love these verses so much. And there's also an underlying message we want to be watching for right here at the beginning. It says this in verse 23, and it came to pass in process of time, which that becomes a really important part of this Exodus story, those words, in process of time. Sometimes deliverance doesn't come overnight. Sometimes it doesn't happen when you are barely praying for it. You know those moms were praying for deliverance when that baby was 3 months old. And it's going to be in process of time that this deliverance is going to start to happen. And that is true in our own stories as well.
And I just think it might be important to like think, like this phrase that goes through my head a lot of times when I read this story of, really it won't be 80, it's not going to be 80 years. It'll be 80 years before they get to leave Egypt. And they're praying and begging for it right now. And they're not seeing anything. They're not seeing anything. But the baby's already in the basket.
Yeah.
Like the deliverance story has already begun. And I think it would be so important when I don't see God working to just remind ourselves the baby's in the basket. Like He is already working it out.
Yeah. It's so good. And it says this, that the king of Egypt died and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage. And they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. And I want you to think about this because it is so interesting. At the very end of Genesis, in Genesis 46, there is this line that happens there. Remember, this is at the end of the happy ending. This is when the whole family came, all the boys came, and Joseph was like, remember, here I am. Am I not where God needed me to be? And I've been able to deliver our whole family. And in 46, God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night. And He said, Jacob, Jacob. And anytime you see a name repeated twice, you know something really important is about to happen. Sometimes He'll just say a name once. If He says it twice, He's like, this is like urgent for you. And He said, here am I. And He said, I am God, the God of thy father. Like, this is who I am. And then He says, fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. And I think that is so important because in the middle of the happy ending story, there is this moment when the Lord says to Jacob, and it's just this moment of condescension. It's this moment of, I will not leave you until I've done everything I promised you. It's this moment when he was like, I will go down with you to Egypt, to that hard place, to that dark place, to that place where you need rescue. I will go down with you into that place. And then I love when he says, I will also surely bring you up again. And it hints so much of the purpose of a redeemer, of a deliverer. I like to say all the time that Jesus will meet us where we are, as we are. You know, right in that place. He will come down into our story, but he doesn't intend to leave us there. He's going to lift us up to where he is, as he is. That's the story of the children of Israel. That's my story. That's your story. And it's the story that is getting painted right here with Jacob, where he's like, I will go down. I will meet you where you are, as you are, in that really hard place in Egypt, in bondage. I will come into that place and I will bring you out of that place. That's what I'm going to do. I will lift you up. I will take you out of there. And this is going to be the beginning of that turn of events. And it starts in the middle of a wilderness.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's cool. As you were saying that, I was just thinking about the fact that Moses was this prince of Egypt, but God brought him down to be one of the Hebrew slaves, and he will deliver them from among them, not from above them. And there's a series of events that leads Moses to leave that station of Egypt. And it starts with compassion. Remember, he sees something, an altercation happening. He has compassion, and he ends up killing, accidentally, we don't know, this Egyptian worker. And the Hebrew people actually tattle on him. And you're kind of like, come on, I was defending you. And he has to leave Egypt. And so he goes out into the wilderness. As a 40-year-old, he leaves this old life and he comes across this new family. The Midianites is what they're called. And Jethro is father-in-law, and he marries a woman named Zipporah. And now he begins a life as a sheep herdsman, as a shepherd, very different from where he was. And he's just out living his best life.
And you love that Jethro just loves him right off the bat. And it's because the shepherds came and Moses sees them and they're just working and Moses is just sitting there. And then he jumps up and draws water, helps them water their whole flock, just jumps in and is like, it's almost as if he's like, I was so lonely, right? I'm just going to join these guys and talk to these guys for a minute. And then they leave and they go to Jethro and tell him and said unto his daughters. And then they were like, well, where is he? Why did you leave him there? Go get him and bring him to where we are. And you just love that Moses was just a good boy. He just was like, how can I help in this situation? And then he didn't expect anything from it. He just stayed where he was, lonely. And they were like, go get him and bring him back here. And so now he becomes a shepherd. Yeah. That's what he is.
So there he is, just doing his laundry one day, just his regular, chores of
really, he just led the flock to the backside of the mountain.
That some people do laundry and some people lead sheep. It's just what I mean is just like it was on a Wednesday. This was just a regular day, and he's out leading the flock. Which actually, when I read this morning, I was thinking, oh, that's so interesting that God made him a shepherd first before he became a shepherd. And he's like, I'm going to let you practice on sheep first, and then I'm going to give you people, And so he's kind of teaching him to be a leader, to be a shepherd. And he's leading these sheep just up the mountain like he always does. And in verse 2, an angel of the Lord appeared, and you find out later it is the Lord himself in a flame of fire. Yeah, it just says right in
the footnote, if you were wondering, it's the presence of the Lord that comes.
Yeah, in the JST, they're the presence of the Lord in this flame of fire in this bush. And bush is probably burned all the time, out in the hot desert. But this one wasn't being consumed. Like there was something about it that was different. And Moses knew right away, like, hold on a second, there's something about this. And we love these two lines. We wrote them in the journal there. That it says that he turned aside. This is in verse 4.
3 first.
Verse 3, I will now turn aside and see this great sight. Why is that bush not burnt? There was something happening that he was like, hold on, this is something different. I want to look into this a little bit more. And when he does that, when he turns aside to see, takes that moment to consider what's happening, God calls him from out of the bush. And he said, Moses, Moses. There it is. We were looking for that. Repeating a name twice, that tenderness of that, Moses, Moses. And he says, yeah.
This is important. This is urgent.
And then he says in verse 5, put your shoes from off your feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. And this was just a custom of the day probably, but just this whole idea of taking off your shoes as a way of showing respect for a place that you are entering into. It was like a recognition that I'm coming now into a holy place.
And I also like too, particularly in this story, that what is in the wilderness? Like, who's ever been into a desert place? We live right by one, so we go into those type of places all the time. And there's scorpions out there. There's like bugs out there. The rocks are super sharp. The sand is hot. It is so hot. People do not take off their shoes in desert places. You just don't. It's not safe to take your shoes off. And I love that one of the things that is happening in this moment is Moses is going to have to become vulnerable in this relationship with the Lord. He's going to have to put his trust in the Lord that, like, is this a good idea to take my shoes off? Is this a good idea to enter into this relationship? And I think we all have those vulnerable moments when we're like, okay, putting my life in your hands could hurt a little bit, and it might be hard to walk. And just this entering in, it wasn't easy. Taking off those shoes, it was not easy. That there's a little bit about being vulnerable, and there is a lot about honoring the sacred that is taking place in this moment.
And Andy's come to him in a flame of fire.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, I wish you would have come in as a ladybug or something like gentle,
Yes.
And so there is something about like, oh, I'm entering into the presence of someone very, very powerful and very like awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
And it draws that out of Moses, and he comes and I love the idea of,
are you going to tell our favorite part right here?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That he just says the ground that you are standing on is holy ground. And it was just a mountain. But the reason it was holy is because God was there. And it's interesting that it's a bush. Just this bush. It's there's nothing spectacular about a bush. Like come in an evergreen tree or like a redwood or something. But it is just this simple bush.
And I love in the Torah I was reading, and there's this a midrash is where just people they'll gather these quotes that just rabbis have sat around and talked about it. And there was one rabbi who was saying, you ask me, why did he come in a bush? And I would tell you the reason for the bush, except for then you would be, well, then why didn't he come in the tree? And if he had come in a tree, then you would be like, well, why did he come in the tree? And if I said, well, he came in this, your next question would be, well, why did he come in that? And he said, the important thing you need to realize from him coming in a bush is that there is no place that is devoid of God's presence. And I just love the thought of that he can show up anywhere in anyone's story. You don't have to be someone remarkable. You don't have to be someplace amazing for God to enter your story.
Yeah, you don't need stained glass windows, or great architecture for a place to be holy.
Yeah.
It's holy because God was there, which means any place can be holy.
Yeah.
Like a car ride can be holy. A living room can be holy. A closet can be holy.
Yep.
Right? These ordinary places.
Yep.
There's no place to void.
And you love that you have, we know there are set apart or dedicated holy places, but you love
which
also,
they'll see with that mountain later. The same mountain becomes one.
Yeah, and you love that we have those. We have places that are set apart. But you love also that God can enter your story just where you are also. We can choose to enter his story the same as he can choose to enter into our story. And I love the thought of that kind of a relationship.
We love this quote here by Elizabeth Browning. It's written in the journal. It says, "Earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. And only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit round it and pluck blackberries." And it is such a darling, like, little quote to just re-emphasize that fact that, like, oh, maybe take time to turn aside and see where God is moving and working. And when you see him there, maybe take off your shoes.
Yeah, acknowledge.
And acknowledge his presence, and acknowledge that this is a holy experience in a holy place. And that can be done by just expressing gratitude, or just recognizing it.
Sometimes we call those moments tender mercies. And I love when Elder Eyring was like, are you taking time to write those down? To just capture those moments in your life.
Then you get into the heart of this conversation, where God says to him, he introduces himself. "I'm the God of life."
And before you do that, can we just say this one part and bring it full circle?
Yeah.
It's actually right after, but are you going here right now?
No, I was just starting in 6, where he's just starting.
And then are you going to go there?
Yeah.
Okay, then before you go there, I just want to say this one part that is so good, because the Lord says out loud what we read happened in chapter 2 when he says, "I've surely seen the affliction of my people,"
verse 7,
"which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows." And then I love in verse 8 when he says this, "And I am come down to deliver them." So again, we're going to see that condescension again right there, that he's like, this is why I'm here, Moses, that I'm going to meet you in this story. I'm going to come down to where you are as you are, and I am here to bring you out, to lift you up, to get you to a different place. And by the time you all get to that other place, you're going to know me a lot better than you know me now. And Moses wants to know who this guy is. So then
the Lord drops the bomb on him and says, well, it's actually you, right? You are going to be the answer to their prayer, to their decade-long prayers, to their century-long prayers, however long this was. You're going to be the answer. In verse 10, "I'm going to send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring forth my children of Israel out of Egypt." And immediately Moses is like, in verse 11, "Who am I? I think you have the wrong person. Do you know that will bankrupt all of Egypt if I take away their entire workforce? There's no way that is going to happen. And I am not the right person to do this." And in verse 12, the Lord answers and he says, almost essentially, "I know. I am going to be with you," right? And I love that he is going to introduce himself here to Moses, and he uses names to introduce himself, which was common in ancient times because names weren't just titles or labels. They were like a description of character, and they were an explanation of identity.
Which we're noticing, right? Because
Right.
remember, we saw it with the midwives, and we saw it again with Moses' mom, and you see it with Moses, that for some reason, Old Testament names are really indicative of the character or outcome of that person's experience.
Yeah. So when Moses says I'm the wrong guy and nobody's even going to believe me when I go down there, and then he asks a question that would make sense if you know this about names. At the end of 13, he says, "They're going to ask me what's his name, the God that sent you. What should I say to them?"
And you love also the part that we were talking about, that just knowing someone's name all of a sudden makes them more approachable.
Yeah.
And so you love that Moses is like, okay, if we're going to be working together, I need to know, who are you?
Right.
And how would I introduce you? Because no one's going to think I could do this by myself. So I'm going to need to have backing.
Yeah. And all he knows so far about him is you're obviously very, very powerful.
Yes.
But you're also very, very intimate because you knew my name and we're having a one-on-one and you knew where I was. You know what's happening with the children of Israel. You're a God who answers prayers and cares and knows. And then he says, his answer is, "Who are you?" And God said to Moses in verse 14, "I am that I am. Thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you." And let's just spend a little bit of time here unpacking that verse.
Name.
And there's so much to unpack. And
It's so fun too, because when you say to people, choose your favorite name of Jesus or Jehovah, whoever says, I am.
Oh, wait, me.
I know, but
Remember?
only because you know.
Oh, yeah.
But I think...
I was like, wait, remember at Christmas?
Right.
I was like, wait, that's my...
If you don't know, it's just generally not going to be the name you pick. Like if you're teaching young women this week and you're like, say your favorite name of Jesus, no one is going to be like, oh, I am. That's my favorite name.
Yeah.
Because it feels really big. It feels really overwhelming unless you start looking into why is, of all the names he could have chosen, why is he like, oh, I think I'll use this
I
one.
am.
Why didn't he use like faithful witness? Or
Yeah.
why didn't he use captain of the host? Or why didn't he use, there's a million things that Moses would have been like, oh, okay, that's a good
Perfect.
one.
Yeah.
But why did he choose I am that I am?
The God of angel armies. You're like,
Yes.
I'm so happy you're here. And he uses this name, I am. Now, this is something that will be really interesting throughout the rest of the Old Testament study. There is a lot of linguistic debate on this, but some people settle on the fact that that's where the name Jehovah comes from, is that I am can be translated into just 4 Hebrew letters that sound like Yahweh, or in English, Jehovah. And so every time that name would show up, that's the way the children of Israel will refer to him, as Yahweh. But because they consider his name so sacred, they wouldn't write it out. And instead, they gave him the word Adonai, a nickname, the Lord. So anytime you see capital L-O-R-D in the Old Testament, most of the time you see capital L-O-R-D, that is the sacred name of God, Yahweh or Jehovah. But the translators also were considerate of that custom and tradition of the Jews.
Keeping it sacred.
And keeping it sacred. And they just wrote capital L-O-R-D. So every time you see that this is the name that you are reading that gets introduced right here. And there's that phrase where he says, I am that I am. And because of the Hebrew of it, with the past and present and future tenses, there are several ways to translate that name. And we'll each share one. One way that you can translate that is, I am who I will always be. And that's just a way of saying who I was in the past is who you can expect me to be in the future. I am who I will always be. In the next verse, he's going to tell them, remind everybody, I'm the God of Abraham, I'm the God of Isaac, and I'm the God of Jacob.
I'm the God who promises, I'm the God who provides, I'm the God who prevails. And who I was then
is who I'm going to be. This is what you can anticipate in your present and in your future. Who I always have been is who I'm going to be now and who I'm going to be in the future. So that's one way that you could translate that phrase, that name that just has so much meaning to it and so much expectation and so much anticipation also.
Well, and gives you so much trust. You're just like, okay, I saw what you did here. I saw what you did here. The other way that name can be translated, which we love, is I will be what tomorrow demands. Do you love the thought of that? I am great enough. I am powerful enough. I have enough fullness in my arsenal that I can be whatever tomorrow demands. That's the God I am. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that's the God I want.
Yes.
I just want the God who will be whatever tomorrow demands. And then now you love I am that I am.
Yeah. And it's just interesting as you look forward, because we know their story. Just like if you have an ocean, if tomorrow's demand is an ocean, I open them. If tomorrow's demand is hunger, I rain bread.
Yes.
If tomorrow's demand is serpents, I'm a healer. If whatever tomorrow's demand is,
I can answer that.
Which means you don't have to live in fear today. Because fear always exists in the future, right? Fear is never, it's always just like, oh, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
What's going to go, what's the worst outcome? And he says I'm in the future. And whatever it demands,
I will be there.
I will be there.
For you.
When I was reading this morning, it was interesting when he asked that question in verse 11, who am I? And just comparing that with where the Lord says, I am. And just that whole idea of sometimes maybe we should not focus so much on who am I, but we should remember I am. Like, take it off of us and put it on to, who he is.
Yeah, that's so good.
And don't you like this? I like that his name is a fill in the blank.
Yes.
Like, it's almost an incomplete sentence.
Yeah.
Who are you? And he's like, I am.
Whatever you need.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that you need me to be.
Yeah. That's so good. And I love that he says, you go get everyone together and you tell them that the Lord God of your fathers, I'm in verse 16, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, appeared unto me, saying, I have surely visited you and seen what is happening to you in Egypt, and I will bring you up out, he says to them, and I'm going to take you to this place flowing with milk and honey. And I love... when he says this, the king of Egypt will not let you go, but I will stretch out my hand and with all my wonders, which I will do. And after that, he will let you go, and I will give this people favor. And then I love this in the end of 21, and you shall not go empty. I just think that is such a beautiful promise to the Lord's people, to the children of Israel, that when you go, you won't go empty, that he is the God of fullness. That is who he is. And we can anticipate that everywhere in our life. So we get into 4, and then you love what happens here, because Moses, like, he watches the fire burn, he takes off his shoes, he asks for his name, he listens to God say, this is the plan, Moses, I'm going to go with you, I'm going to deliver you, all the people, everyone. Like, he listens to that whole speech. And you love that Moses' first thing he says is, they will not believe me. Like, he's like, this is a good idea, but let me just say this, they will not believe thee. And we're going to go through these 3 questioning moments of Moses' right now as we're ending. That first one, we saw the same thing that happened with the midwives, that he revered God. In this second one, we're going to watch this moment of sacrifice. Like, Moses is going to have to sacrifice. He's going to have to put the baby in the basket. He's going to have to do the thing that he's like, I don't know how this is going to turn out.
Yeah.
And the first thing he says that you maybe want to write in your box right here is, they will not believe me, in Moses 3:1. They're going to say, 4:1.
Yeah.
They're going to say, the Lord did not appear to you. And so he's like, then what am I going to do about that? And the Lord's like, oh, do you see that staff in your hand? Put it on the ground. And he put it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses ran away. I love it. He's like, oh my heck, who is this? And what is he doing to my stick? That he's like, I don't even know what happened. And the Lord's like, come back, put forth your hand, and he's going to take it by the tail, and it becomes a rod again. And yeah.
Well, I was going to say, which is so freaky, right? Obviously, he's afraid of snakes, okay?
Yeah.
Because he ran away from him. He wasn't like, cool, like a 5-year-old boy. He was just like, ah. And then when the Lord's like, grab it, and it's like, no.
And you're never supposed to grab things by their tail either. I'm not a snake person, but I'm pretty sure you're supposed to go for the neck. Yeah. Is that not true?
It's too close to the teeth. I feel like I would just like swing it out like this.
Yeah, I think I'm right. You're supposed to go. It can't bend if you
I'm
get
taking a
neck.
shovel to the neck is my approach.
Everyone's going to tell us now.
Okay, you don't have to tell us. We'll look it up on YouTube. But I just think it's interesting that it's like this thing that he fears, but it's okay. Because he's going to go before Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And it's going to be like, I'm so scared. And he's like, I promise you, it's going to feel like grabbing a snake. Yeah. Because that's scary. But I'm going to turn it into it. Yeah.
And I love that the message he tells to him, the first message. So the first question is, they're not going to believe me. And the first answer is, what do you do with a staff? What will Moses do with that staff? He will lead. Your job is going to be to lead. You're going to have to sacrifice your fear in order to be able to lead. So the second thing he says to him, there's a second part of that that's important, because remember, he takes his hand and he makes it become like a leper, which also you would be like, well, now I can never go home again. I can't even go back to the people. And then the next thing you know, it's made clean again. And that's the second job Moses is going to have, is to restore. So through sacrifice, he will lead. Through sacrifice, he will restore. And then there's going to be those 2 signs, which remember, he's going to do both of these. I'm just throwing my
Seriously,
journal.
like, I lost 6 years of my life. Right then.
Scared you?
Yes.
Did you think it was a snake?
So I just grabbed him by the tail.
And then he says to him, if those 2 things aren't going to work, then he says, the water, which comes out of the water, will be blood on the dry land. And there's this hint of deliverance. So Moses' job is going to be to lead, to rescue, and then to deliver.
Restore is the word you used.
Restore. Lead, restore, and then deliver. That's his job, and it is going to require a lot of sacrifice. And meanwhile, first of all, the Lord showed up burning in a bush. Then he turned the rod into a snake. Then Moses picked up the snake and it went back to the rod. And now he's going to turn water into blood. Like he's showing Moses all these powerful things that are happening. And I love that the second thing Moses says, well, first of all, he's like, the people won't listen to me. Second of all, he's like, well, here's the problem. I'm not a good speaker. Yeah. I'm not eloquent enough. No one is going to listen to what I say or what I'm going to do. And I love when the Lord's answer to that is, because Moses says, I'm of a slow speech and of a slow tongue. We don't know what that means exactly. There's a lot of people have said how that happened or what the cause of that was. All we have is what's right here. But I love the Lord's answer to him, because I think all of us, there are some times when we're like, this is why I won't be good at this, Lord. This is why I won't. And I love that the Lord says to him, who made your mouth? Don't you love that? Is what he wants to say. Who's in charge of people who are dumb or deaf or blind? Is that not my job? Like, isn't that what I'm in charge of? So you go and I will be with your mouth. Like, look what I did to your rod. Look what I did to the water. Do you not think I can do something, with your words, with your eloquence? Like, just believe in me and what I have the capability to do. And again, it is such a sacrifice. Moses is like giving every reason why this is not going to work out, right? This is going to be painful for me. I don't want to do any of this. This could go really bad for me. And then you love that, and the Lord is so patient. He's like, if this, he's just walking him through it. And then he says this in verse 13. And he said, "O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him who thou wilt send." Or in other words, that's really hard to understand. Listen, send anyone but me. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to go. I thought it all through. I've seen all the things. No, I'm not your guy. You got to choose someone else. And then in verse 14 is the first time when the Lord gets a little bit impatient. And he's like, listen, Moses, you can do this. Go get Aaron. He can support you. He can be your support in this. And you're the guy. Like, this is going to be, this is your job. This is what you're going to do. Go back and do it. And I love that all along the way, you see Moses and his first inclination is to refuse to doubt and to question. That's what happens. And one of the things that I love when we watch this is that's who we are. We would respond probably the same way. And probably every prophet has felt that way.
And not even prophets,
and apostles and
us,
and all of us. And this is one thing I love, though, as you think about a prophet in this moment, as we get to actually go inside the heart of a prophet, and we get to see that a prophet can have faith and doubt and anxiety and feel like they're not worthy for what they're up against. And one of the things I was reading this week talked about in Moses, God shows us that this is not just a cardboard stand-up that just does exactly what God wants him to do, but we get to see that he's not someone who just answers without question. Okay, I did it. Now what do you want me to do? Okay, I did that. Now what do you want me to do? That's not the heart of a prophet. That's we just don't often get to see the turmoil of watching that faith and that doubt play back and forth, and the anxiety and the unworthiness and that questioning and that trying to resolve things and working things through with the Lord. And I love that in Moses, we get to see that vulnerable side.
Yeah.
We get to be invited into that intimate moment that we don't often get to see in a leader. That there are those moments of just like, can I do this?
Yeah.
Am I capable of something like this? And that heavy reliance on the Lord that I think is a really beautiful part of this story. But it also gives me a lot of empathy and love and compassion when I think of like President Nelson or someone else who the Lord has tasked with an urgent responsibility, who also is like, how am I going to do this? And what if I don't do it right? And what if I don't say it right? And what if I'm trying to lead right now a group of people who, if I fall, they might not let me get back up? That I'm trying to speak to a group of people who doesn't allow for repentance. They don't allow for grace. They don't allow for me to try and work through what the Lord is telling me to do. Like, how would Moses have done in our generation? You know?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I don't know how he would have made it through this world that we live in right now with all of our social media and people trying to tell people what they're doing right or wrong. And I can imagine this is a time when, as a prophet or apostle, you're like, they won't listen to me. And also, I'm not very good with words. What if my words are not culturally acceptable? What if I say it wrong?
Right.
What do you want me to do?
Right.
And that importance of just realizing we're not working with a cardboard stand-up. We're working with a man who's probably doing his best to try and get things right.
Yeah, a man with likes and dislikes and passions and worries and all of those things. And I think sometimes we lead out when we talk about when we talk about leadership, we always lead out with their strength, which I think is fantastic. But we're like, oh, he's great because he's so smart and he went to this school and he's got this skill set. And certainly God's going to use people's experiences and skill sets, to further the work of the kingdom, to help them be leaders and whatever. And he's trained them and brought them up. But I don't think it's like the skills that make like a prophet powerful. I actually think it's their trust in God.
And their humility,
right,
and their willingness to be vulnerable.
And weakness precedes that. So it's interesting. It's like, oh, their perceived weakness is actually their strength because it led them to the only source of strength that they know. And so I just think it's really, really powerful when we see this. And you keep watching it happen. As we look at these, let's do this middle one real quick. And this last one's really powerful because it's that same lesson that he learned at the bush again. But he learns really quickly, I'm going to have to watch over a really difficult situation because he gets into Egypt and initially everybody believes him when he gets there. And he's like, all right, the elders do. And he's like, all right, okay, this is going to be great. And at the beginning of 5, he goes into Pharaoh and he says, the Lord God says, let my people go, in verse 1. And Pharaoh answers back and he says, who's the Lord? This is Egypt. This is a place of many, many gods. And he comes in and he says, Jehovah says, let my people go. And he's like, I've heard of Ra and I've heard of Tim Duke, or whatever. I have never heard of Jehovah before. And he says, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let them go? He says, I know not the Lord, so I'm not going to let Israel go. And I put no blame on Pharaoh for that question. I actually think it's a really responsible question to ask. If you're like, the Lord says, let my people go. And it's just like, well, who's the Lord? Because why would I listen to or trust or follow somebody that I don't know? And Moses is in that learning process right now. Moses is learning to trust him. And God's going to do the same thing with Pharaoh. But initially here, he's like, I don't know what he's like. And so he's like, oh, man. And he performs the miracles,
the
that he's supposed to do. And it doesn't work, And so then at the end of the chapter, he goes back and he's like,
you have to read it. You have to read it. It's the best part. It's in 22 and 23.
And Moses returned unto the Lord and he said, Lord, wherefore hast thou so evil entreated this people? Why is it thou hast sent me?
I love it. He's like, why did you send me?
Yeah, because I went and I did all the tricks that you told me to do. And then he says, for since the day I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he hath done evil to this people. Neither hast thou delivered thy people at all. Just so you know.
You didn't do it.
You didn't do it. And isn't that so indicative of humanity?
Yeah.
Where it's like, it's been a week and it's like, you didn't do it.
Yeah.
You hate me.
And I
You forgot
love-
about me.
And I love that it's not just a little. He's like, you did not deliver this people at all. In case you haven't noticed. It's so
And
awesome.
so he just has this, again, he's coming back to like, wait, okay, all right, I believe you. Everyone believed me. I've got some, and it's just
I did my 3 things. I did everything I was supposed to do.
It got worse.
Yeah.
And it's just like, sometimes this happens, we're just like, man, there's a lot of confidence when you're standing in front of the burning bush, but what about when it goes out and you're left and you're like, it's not working? And he asked that question. We wrote this question. His question again was like, how am I supposed to do this? And why did you pick me? And chapter 6
it is so good.
A brilliant answer to that question.
And there's a couple things that you might want to do right here in chapter 6. I went through from 1 through 8, and I circled every I. It's just circled right in my thing.
The letter I, right?
Yeah,
the word,
the letter I. Because this is going to be, again, the Lord's promise to covenant Israel. If you want to find a really good promise to covenant Israel chapter 6 is such a good one. And this is what he's going to do. If you just look at the eyes, he's like, now you're going to see what I will do to Pharaoh. And God spake unto Moses in verse 2 and said, I am the Lord. I am who I am, right? That's what he tells him. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by the name of God Almighty, but by my name Jehovah I wasn't known to them yet. But I'm that same God. I have established my covenant with them. In 5, I have heard the groaning of Israel. I have remembered my covenant. In 6, I am the Lord. I am who I said I would be, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you or deliver you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with a stretched out arm and with great judgments, and I will take you to me for a people. I will be to you a God, and you will know that I am the Lord your God, which bringeth you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will bring you in unto the land concerning the which I did swear to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you for a heritage. I am the Lord. And you just love these words that were so powerful in that story, but are powerful in ours, that I will establish, I will hear, I will remember, I will free, I will deliver, I will redeem, I will take, I will bring. That's what the Redeemer does. That is the job of the Redeemer. And we have just written at the bottom of the journal, right down here, what redeem means.
And this is actually the first time, if my looking is right, and reading, that this word, this particular word that we're so endeared to, this title, that it shows up. It's the first time.
And it has such a neat definition in Hebrew, and one that you kind of want to just hold on to. Redeem means to deliver in any wise. It will be used later in the Old Testament in a different way to mean redeem by any means. But I love that thought of in any wise or by any means. And let's just think what that could mean, because delivery is going to come not the way Moses envisions, right? It's going to come by the Red Sea actually opening up and them walking through on dry ground. Who in this moment thinks that might happen?
Right.
No one's like, I think we should start praying for the Red Sea to open. No one's thinking that in their mind. And think about this. Same thing within Martin's a handcart journey. In the middle of that night when it seems like there will be no rescue, no deliverance, no redemption, when did God plan for that cove?
Yeah.
To be there in that place, just in that moment, that they would need rescue in any wise.
Yeah.
How many eons of years before Martin even started making his handcarts did God create the cove that would be their deliverance? And again, who thought deliverance was going to come from a man riding a donkey? Right. And a cross? That you start realizing that this idea of redeem, this redeemer, this deliverer who will work in any wise, right? By any means, we have no idea what deliverance is going to look like in our story, but he does. Mm-hmm. He already knows. He knew when Moses went in the basket, okay, here comes this story now, and he already knows the deliverance is going to come. And whatever your story is right now, whatever deliverance you are praying for right now, and it's the same lesson we taught last week. If you're in the pit or the palace or the prison or in the middle of Egypt, wherever you are, God will deliver you in any wise, probably in a way that you can't even imagine. Or the thought that that thing would be real is too good for what you have in mind. But that is who our God is.
And who he'll always be.
And who he'll always be.
Right.
And just that thought of, I will be what tomorrow demands.
Yeah.
That thing you are so afraid of, I already know what to do with that thing. And just that thought makes me want to be like, should I just walk around barefoot for the rest of my life? You know, to have that kind of God in my story just makes me want to just take off my shoes. It wants me to think I am so grateful for a God like that.
Yeah, and I think if I were teaching a lesson, like I know like with my own kids, or if I were teaching a youth Sunday school or something like that, I think that might be of this lesson, the part I would focus on. If you're like, man, which part would I pick? I think I would start with Pharaoh's question, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? And then go back to chapter 3 and watch him introduce himself to Moses and say, this is who I am. And then come back to chapter 6 and to see that list, that's a list of this is who I am. This is what I do. And then to talk together and say, and where have you seen that? Where have you seen him be that?
Well, and who is your Pharaoh? And how do you need God to show up? Because he is ...
Right.
I am ...
Yeah, this is who I, and it would be awesome for people to say like, oh, the God I need right now, the God that tomorrow demands is, and just to see, is that who he is? And then to watch for him. That could be a great invitation for people, and could be really, really powerful to teach us, like Moses' journey, how to trust him, how to like put our lives in, put our baskets into the river, put our lives into his hands. Let's first learn who he is, and then from there we go.
So good. Such a good lesson.
Okay, we love this one. Next time is just as rad and good. So see you next week.